Hello and welcome to today's webinar. On behalf of European Pharmaceutical Review and Thermo Fisher Scientific, I'd like to thank you all for attending. I'm your moderator, Craig Waters, Interim Editor of European Pharmaceutical Review. Today's speakers will be Gail Love, Director and QA Consultant at Love CQA Limited, John Parker, Director and Principal Consultant at ClinPark QA Limited, and Shailesh Karabhadra, Applications Manager at Thermo Fisher Scientific. Following their presentations, we will move on to a live Q&A session where you can ask questions to today's speakers. Please remember that you can submit questions at any point during the webinar using the questions panel found in the menu on the right side of your screens. So I will now hand over to today's speakers, Gail Love, John Parker, and Shailesh Karabhadra.
Thank you very much, Craig. So today we're going to be talking about quality assurance and data integrity from an auditor's perspective. And as QA consultants, we audit many different types of organizations involved in the development and manufacture of medicinal products. Now we're focusing this time really around GMP. And this may include companies that discover, develop, manufacture and test active pharmaceutical ingredients and finished products for use in preclinical and clinical studies and also for commercial sale. This may involve audits of QC test laboratories that are an integral part of the site's manufacturing activities, or they may be standalone laboratories contracted to perform some or all of the analysis of materials and products. And as auditors, our aim is to assess these organizations for their compliance with GMP requirements, with a focus around the integrity of data and ultimately the safety of the end user and patient. So for this presentation, we will be reviewing some of the regulatory requirements that govern cGMP that a laboratory will need to comply with, and discussing some of the topics that we evaluate during an audit of a QC testing laboratory. Now, I wanted to just start by covering some of the GMP regulatory requirements. This isn't intended to be an in-depth review of the regulations and the detail within them. You will need to really read these regulations that are relevant to your regions or territories and make sure that you do understand the requirements. But for instance, within the USA, so we have the Code of Federal Regulations 21 CFR Part 210, which is current good manufacturing practice in manufacturing, processing, packing or holding of drugs. We also have 21 CFR Part 211, which applies to cGMP for finished products. And also we have 21 CFR Part 11, which relates to electronic records and electronic signatures. It's not just applicable to the pharmaceutical industry, it's an industry-wide regulation that applies to regulated industries. There are other codes of federal regulations that you should be aware of, depending on the area that you're working, and these can include specific regulations for biologics. Okay. Now, within the European Union, we have the European Directive 2001/83. That is the main directive relating to medicinal products for human use. We also have 2003/94, which lays down the principles and guidelines of good manufacturing practice in respect of medicinal products for human use and investigational products for human use. It's important to note there that that directive is being repealed, and it will be replaced by the two regulations at the bottom of this slide, which is 2017-1569, which is GMP basically for investigational products for human use, and 2017-1572, which is GMP for investigational products for human use. So you will now have a separate regulation for investigational medicinal products and a separate regulation for marketed medicinal products. Okay. We also have the EU regulation 1252/2014, and that is regarding the principles and guidelines of GMP for active substances for medicinal products for human use. So the active pharmaceutical ingredient. And within Europe, the GMP principles and guidelines have been further detailed in a series of documents referred to as EUDRELEX Volume 4. That is split into two main parts, one for medicinal products and part 2 for active pharmaceutical ingredients, and it's supplemented by about 19-20 annexes. Okay. Now, I really just wanted to also tell you about some of the other requirements and guidelines that are in place that you also need to be aware of. So it's not just the regulatory requirements, but there are also a lot of other guidelines out there. One is with the International Society for Pharmaceutical Engineering. You would probably be more aware of some of the guidelines that they issue, such as GAMP5, which stands for Good Automated Manufacturing Practice. And GAMP5 is a guideline on compliant GXP computerized systems, but there are a whole host of other GAMP documents, including a risk-based approach to GXP compliant laboratory computerized systems and IT infrastructure control and compliance. And those last two are certainly guidance documents that I focus on when I'm auditing a laboratory. We also have the ICH guidelines, so the International Council on Harmonization. Again, there are a whole host of guidelines in there, but particular ones that I would like to draw to your attention are ICH Q7, which is Good Manufacturing Practice, ICH Q9, Quality Risk Management, and ICH Q10, the Pharmaceutical Quality System. And also the Pharmaceutical Inspection Cooperation scheme also has a GMP guide. Okay, this is not an exhaustive list, but these are some of the key ones that you should be aware of. Now, as I said, I'm not going to go through all the regulations in detail, but I wanted to just pull out some of the key points, okay, that relate to a laboratory. So if you look at CFR 21 Part 211, for instance, in the US, 211.22 of that regulation states that adequate laboratory facilities for the testing and approval or rejection of components, drug product containers, closures, packaging materials, in-process materials, and drug products shall be available to the quality control unit. Okay. Also within Part 211, you have item 68, which refers to automatic, mechanical, and electronic equipment. And what this is really saying, that if you are going to be using such equipment in the manufacture and testing of medicinal product, it must be appropriate for its intended use. So you must make sure that you routinely calibrate, inspect, or maintain or check it according to a written program designed to assure proper performance, and that written records of these calibration checks and inspections shall be maintained. So as auditors, we will be looking that you have SOPs or equivalent documented systems for ensuring the maintenance, servicing and calibration of your equipment, and that you have the appropriate records to provide evidence that you are actually calibrating and maintaining those equipment according to your defined requirements. Okay. It also talks about computerized systems as well, to ensure that any computerized systems that you are using are appropriately checked and validated. Okay. And we will be getting on to validation later on when Gail talks to you about that. So some key points coming out of Europe: premises and equipment to be used to manufacture or import medicinal products here that are critical to the quality of the product shall be subject to appropriate qualification and validation. So when we're talking about laboratory equipment often is electronic equipment made up of pieces of hardware and software, and those must be appropriately qualified or validated for use. Okay. It also says the manufacturer shall be obliged to establish and maintain a documentation system. So we're talking about having the necessary documentation in the form of SOPs, etc., and records that you are going to be making of the analysis that you perform. It also says that when electronic, photographic, or other data processing systems are used instead of written documents, the manufacturer shall first validate the system. So there's a little bit of a theme here that, a laboratory will be using a lot of electronic analytical equipment that has to comply with regulatory requirements and needs to be qualified and validated. Looking at UDRELEX Volume 4, in the Chapter 4 on documentation, suitable controls should be implemented to ensure the accuracy, integrity, availability, and legibility of documents. Data integrity is a very hot topic, I guess, amongst regulators, and they do focus on how an organization ensures the integrity of its data, and we will be talking a little bit about that. Okay. Also, Annex 11 in UDRELEX Volume 4 states that the application should be validated and that the IT infrastructure should be qualified. Risk management should be applied throughout the life cycle of the computerized system, taking into account patient safety, data integrity, and product quality. As part of the risk management system, decisions on the extent of validation and data integrity controls should be based on the justified and documented risk assessment of the computerized system. So when you are going to be implementing, for instance, a new analytical instrument, you need to consider through risk assessment how that system is going to be used, what decisions will be made, on the basis of the results obtained from those systems, and according to that risk level, you must ensure that you have adequate controls in place to ensure the data integrity, and it will also inform you as to the extent of validation and qualification that you will need to perform on that equipment. So that's just a few of the key points. Now, I really want to get on to data integrity because this is such a hot topic. There are a lot of data integrity guidance documents out there. Most of these are actually written with GMP in mind, apart from the second one on this list from the UK's MHRA. So we have the US FDA guidance on data integrity. The MHRA, that says GCP, actually it should be GXP. It's the MHRA's GXP data integrity guidance and definitions. So it actually applies to any of the GCP, GMP, GLP, GDP, GVP, etc. sectors of the pharmaceutical industry. You also have guidance from the PICS group, so the Pharmaceutical Inspection Cooperation Scheme. There's not a formal guidance document as such from the EMA, but they have released in August 2016 a question and answer within the GMP section of their website. And you also have the World Health Organization guidance on good data and records management practices. So there's a lot of guidance out there for you to consider. When we're talking about data integrity, what are we really talking about? Well, really, it's about the correctness of the data. Is it true? It can be described as having the quality of being whole and undivided. Okay. The FDA actually defines it as the completeness, consistency, and accuracy of the data. And the MHRA guidance documents defines it as the degree to which data are complete, consistent, accurate, trustworthy, reliable, and that these characteristics of the data are maintained throughout the life cycle of that data. More commonly, we refer to data attributes as being ALCOA plus. So it's an acronym ALCOA. The plus stands for ACCE. And I've defined for you there what each of those data attributes mean. Okay. So it must be attributable to an individual, the person that actually performed the activity and recorded the data. Okay, it must be done in real time. You must be able to read it. Okay. Now, we refer to the life cycle of that data because the integrity of the data must be maintained throughout its life cycle. And simply put, it's everything from when you generate a piece of data right through to destroying it. So it may go through some or all of these steps depending on the criticality of the data and ultimately the risk to the end user or trial subject. So those are the different steps, and you may even be able to think of some more, but from creation, it may be transfer, transformation and processing, QC, reporting, storage and destruction, but that is the full life cycle of the data. And you should always apply risk management principles when you're looking at the data and ask yourself questions. How critical is that data? What is it being used for? What decisions are being made? And you need to identify the risks to that data. Okay, and when we talk about the risks to that data in terms of data integrity, what we really mean is, what are the risks that that data may be altered in any way or deleted in any way, in a manner such that it would be undetected. Okay, those are the risks that you're really looking for. And then you will evaluate those risks to see what needs to be put in place. So how critical or how likely are those risks to occur, and what the impact of those risks would be. And then you look at putting in measures to control any risks. They can be electronically programmed measures. And just to give you an example would be systems having full audit trails such that you could see if a piece of data was changed or deleted and who did it and when they did it. Okay. It may be that there is a certain level of residual risk and risk acceptance, and again, you would assess this as part of your data integrity risk assessment. And then finally, you have to periodically review the risks to your data and see if the measures that you have in place are still appropriate. So I'd now like to hand over to Gail, who will talk to you about computer system qualification and validation.
Okay, so thanks, John. We want to talk to you about computer system qualification and validation. So as John mentioned earlier, computerized systems need to be validated in order to give assurance of data integrity maintenance. So as an auditor, I want to understand whether computer systems, how the computer system validation has been performed. And if so, what standards did they follow and apply, and how was the CSV and qualification performed? By understanding how an organisation has applied and performed CSV and system qualification, I can assess whether the data has likely been generated and managed in a manner which will assure maintenance of data integrity. So firstly, I want to know what type of systems are being used. Are they simple systems or are they complex systems? Are they commercial off-the-shelf systems or are they in-house developed software? What's the IT system infrastructure that's been put in place to support those computerized systems? And what is the data flow and life cycle of the data, including any interfacing systems or data storage processing systems or areas that are being used? So I really need to understand what are all the different areas of the computerized system that's in place first of all. And then in terms of the actual qualification or the validation of the system, there's various steps that the validation should have gone through depending on what type of system it is. So I want to know, first of all, which systems have they followed? Have they got a GAMP5 structure in terms of defining how they'll perform a computerized system validation? And part of the validation phase is there should be a validation plan in which details the scope of use, the validation approach, the roles and responsibilities, and the acceptance criteria that they're going to use. There should be user requirement specifications and should be established and documented to define the needs for the software and the intended use of the software and critical constraints. You need to establish what functional specifications, how the software should look, what data the software should capture, logic and calculations applied, etc. There should be they should generate a study design specifications which should include network requirements along with database, process, security, interface and architecture design. And then the last step was to build system build or modifications. So the initial validation step goes through all those areas. And then moves on to the qualification process. So We have to obviously cover things like the installation qualification, testing, the operational qualification, performance qualification. So during the completion of these tests, it's likely that some of the validation steps will be modified or updated. So they tend to jump back and forth whilst they're tweaking and developing that system and understanding its set up so that it's fit for purpose. And at the end, they'll do a validation report, which should be present and should define a summary of the system elements and what was completed during the validation phase and the qualification stages with the outcome of those. So those are the key things that I'm looking for as an auditor. Ongoing operations. So once the system is live, however, there should be lots of ongoing operations which continue. And as auditors, we think about what elements are defined, implemented and controlled, specifically to assure data integrity. So items such as what system-to-system interface and data integration is there? Is there appropriate built-in checks for the correct and secure entry and processing of the data? What periodic system reviews are conducted? What do they review? How often, and has it been done? What maintenance, servicing and calibration activities are conducted? Who performs these and in what frequency, and does it comply with validated requirements, etc.? The change in configuration management, i.e. what ongoing user management systems are in place? Is there patch and system upgrades that have been completed, and are they tracked, are they controlled and documented? What quality control checks at critical steps in the data process flow during the normal use has been put in place? Are they sufficient? Are they at every area? Is there sufficient disaster recovery and business continuity measures put in place, i.e. what's the system going to do if it loses power mid-analysis? Is there an instant problem management process in place? Is there something that defines how people oversee any incidents that occur? How do they manage those? Is there process flow in place that can tell them at what point they need to redo analysis based on that? Is there system retirement? So you've got to assure the data for not just now, but you need to be thinking in the future. So what system retirement plan have they got in place for that data so that they can still access the data in the future? And that goes into data storage and archiving with backup and retention, including the metadata. Quite often people remember the raw data itself that's been captured by the system, but they forget about all the supporting information that's held on the system. How will they capture that metadata? And then lastly, they lock down the study or export data to a secondary system. So has that process been controlled? Is there any way for anyone to manipulate any data in between the transporting of data from system to system? Is that being monitored? And then we've got security. So role-based and physical security logical controls are in place to restrict access to the computerized system and or data integrity to authorized persons. The role-based permissions is one of the most important areas, including those to enter, change, deletion, approval and archiving. It's really important that they've got a good oversight over those role-based permissions, so not just the allocation, but also ensuring that there's not multiple roles assigned to the same person. And if there is, then there's not something like one role where the audit trail has been switched on and the other role for the same person where an audit trail could be switched off, because that's just opening the company up to potentially some fraud and misconduct. You have to have complete audit trails with the metadata captured and retained and viewable. So quite often people know that their system's validated and that the audit trail is present, but they don't actually know how to access the audit trail, or they only know how to access a portion of that audit trail. Are they being reviewed? I want to know. I want to look at the regulatory compliant electronic signatures. Are they truly electronically compliant? Are they regulatory compliant signatures? Can you verify that the person has chosen to approve a certain data set? Have they given a reason why they're rejecting some data? Is there appropriate SOPs and manuals in place, and are they documented and are they updated on a regular basis? And training, like I said, training will be covered later, but essentially is the training there? Is it being put in place? Is it being updated? And is it appropriate for the system? And then lastly, we've got what time zones are being used and recorded. So quite often, particularly with analytical systems, they might be using different time zones. And so when might capture that different time zone in the audit trail, which can be very confusing when you're looking at the audit trail, and it would appear the data has been created at different times from when it's been processed, and it can indicate fraud, but actually it's just two different systems that are recording time zones from different time zones. So that's what can affect it. And John, we'll hand over to yourself now.
Thank you, Gail. So also when auditing a laboratory, we will look at the general pharmaceutical quality system, and this comprises a number of areas which you can see on the screen. So we look at, do you have appropriate documents in place in order to operate equipment, for instance. It may be in the format of SOPs, or it may be with reference to controlled operating manuals or equipment manuals. Do you have appropriate test methods, for instance? And of course, we would look to make sure that those test methods have been appropriately validated on the equipment that they're being run on. Do you have an appropriate quality assurance and self-inspection program in place? And as part of that self-inspection program, it should incorporate data integrity. So the QA audit program or self-inspection program, for instance, should look at data integrity issues, and for instance look at audit trails within analytical instrumentation. We look at quality control. So an analyst, for instance, will generate or will analyze a sample and generate a result, and what QC does that then go through? Is it peer reviewed, for instance, by a more senior analyst or laboratory supervisor, and any other QC, such as by the quality assurance unit and qualified person, for instance, in the EU. We look to make sure that roles and responsibilities within the laboratory are clearly defined. So we will be asking to see, for instance, organization charts to make sure that it's clear reporting lines, and we will also ask to see things like job descriptions to make sure that responsibilities are clearly defined and understood by the individuals performing the work. Training we will also look at. I won't go into detail because Gail will be talking about this in a minute. I touched on this earlier with facilities and equipment, so we're looking to make sure that facilities are appropriate for the analytical work being performed, that they are kept in a clean and relatively tidy condition, cleaned, well maintained, etc., and that equipment is also appropriately calibrated, serviced and maintained. We look for things like equipment logbooks, so usually each piece of laboratory equipment will have a logbook to document its usage, and also any servicing and maintenance activities in that book. We will look for certificates of servicing, maintenance by equipment suppliers, etc. And then we will also look within the laboratory how you manage non-conformances or deviations, or in this case perhaps out of specification results, and there should be a process in place which complies with current guidance. Guidance is available on the conduct of laboratory investigations, and we would look how you would perform that and what your CAPA process is. So as a result of those investigations, you may decide that there is certain corrective action that needs to be taken if it's possible to take corrective action, but more importantly as well, preventative action to ensure that issues of a similar nature do not arise again. So we are looking at the entire quality system of a laboratory, and these are some of the aspects that would be covered by that.
Personnel and training. So regardless of what GXP legislation you're complying with, the principles are the same. Each individual should be suitably qualified to perform the roles in which they have been assigned and conduct. In order to ensure data integrity, it needs to be clear that the individual has not only documented evidence of their qualifications, but that training has been effective so that they understand what they're doing and why they do it. So there's multiple ways to gain or demonstrate competency. It can be through previous experience, it can be formal qualifications, it can be SOP or process reading, it can be face-to-face presentations, it can be on-the-job training and competency assessment, and it can be external training courses and workshops. Only if this competency training has been effective, then the individual and the organisation understand what potential impact and consequences of their actions can have on data integrity and the overall quality and compliance. So now we've come to the end of the presentation, but hopefully you'll now have a good understanding of what data integrity is and how it's defined by the regulatory legislation and guidance. You should have a good idea of how we as auditors interpret this legislation and what is considered to influence and impact data integrity. You now understand how data integrity is incorporated and managed within computerized systems, and you have an understanding of what ongoing operations are in place to support the maintenance of data integrity on a daily basis. You need to understand the quality systems in place to support data integrity. And lastly, there's always a human element which needs to be considered when thinking about data integrity.
Thank you, John and Gail, for excellent review on the requirements of implementation of scientific instruments. My name is Sailesh Karabudra. I'm Applications Manager working in EMEA, having wide experience of implementing spectroscopy technologies in pharmaceutical manufacturing. Today, I'm going to give a brief overview on our vibrational spectroscopy product portfolio and how it complies with the regulatory and pharmacopoeia compliances. Vibrational spectroscopy is widely used in pharmaceutical production from the initial API formulation development in quality control phases and also to check the final product ID or the final product quality. In all of these aspects of the production or in the development stages, compliance is absolutely necessary. USP has 1058 Analytical Instrument Qualification Chapter. The components of data quality for various analytical instruments are categorized as follows. If we look up from the base of the triangular, the spectroscopy instrument qualification is one of the requirements. As we go up, the method validation comes into picture, system suitability test, and the quality control check samples that are required to check the quality of the measurement. AIQ is the basis of all the analytical instruments that are used in pharmaceutical, and different categories are given according to the A, B, and C. A is very simple and the C is the most complex, on which reasoning or a test is established. There are guidelines in USP and EP related to every type of spectroscopy technique that is used. For example, 2.2.48 for Raman, 2.2.40 for NIR, 2.2.24 for mid-infrared spectroscopy. Similarly, in USP 854, 856, and 858 are the mid-infrared, near-infrared, and Raman chapters. If we look at the spectroscopy method validation, there is a validation of compendial methods 1225 chapter that is generally applied. The main phases of the AIQ are the qualification phases, which starts from the design qualification, instrument qualification, performance qualification, and ongoing tests that are required to make sure that the systems are complying to the various pharmacopoeia requirements in terms of the system suitability test, how the quality control check samples are done. There are also components of the software validation, because most of the analytical instruments will be running on a firmware. So there is a guideline also on checking the firmware during the instrument qualification stage, also making sure that the software through which the operations are made on the instrument is also validated. Our spectroscopy compliance tool set gives a full compliance. We are a supplier with ISO 9000 certification, and we take very seriously system qualifications of all the instruments and the related softwares. We provide a complete vendor package with the factory traceability standards, and our engineers are certified to do this type of installations. We have full tools for 21 CFR Part 11 compliance, which includes electronic record management, electronic signature management, and the security for the audit trails. We provide full operator training. All our engineers are expert or certified to give the initial operator training, and we give a full support in establishing the SOPs and the method development and validation of these methods. We provide a full validation package, end-to-end validation with complete documentation, which has been written by pharmaceutical experts. In order to make sure that system is properly qualified, a DQ is necessary, which is a design qualification. Most of our spectrometers are off-the-shelf spectrometers, but we do provide design qualification documentation to prove that the system is designed, which is fit for purpose. Our validation package includes full installation qualification tests. Our operational qualification tests are based on pharmacopoeias, whether it's a USP, EP, Japanese pharmacopoeia, or Chinese pharmacopoeia. We use traceable and serialized standards to run these tests, which are again mentioned in these pharmacopoeias. And we provide tools for ongoing performance qualification of the system, which can be routinely done by the operators working with those systems. In order to ensure the data integrity and compliance with 21 CFR Part 11, we provide full operation auditing, enforcement of the SOPs, and automating this. We have a facility to create digital signatures and giving the role-based privileges depending on what that role entitles to, whether it's approver, whether it's just an operator role, or whether they are administrator of the system. We can give particular policies or assign the system policies using these two softwares, Audit Manager and Security Administrator. This slide shows how our entry-level Nikolai Summit FTIR spectrometer with Paradigm software is compliant. We do FTIR qualification with our ValPro package, which includes design qualification, installation qualification, operational qualification, and performance qualification test. We use traceable NIST certified internal polystyrene standard to qualify the system, and certified engineers are carrying out the on-site system qualification. All the system suitability tests are according to various pharmacopoeias, and we can run some additional ASTM tests as well. We provide full factory qualification and performance verification test. In order to use the quality control check sample, that's really dependent on the customer. depending on what test they do. So for example, if they are doing an identity test, making sure that they run a quality control sample after the performance qualification to make sure that the ID test is okay. Alternatively, external standards like polystyrenes are widely used to establish the performance qualification before any real measurements are done on a system. Our security administration consists of two softwares. One is a security administration and one is an audit manager. Security administration allows complete user management, user access, and electronic signatures, and audit manager allows to track all the events and store the data in database architecture. So we provide a full validated software, complete package with factory traceable standard certified installation. Our other systems, which are Nicolai series IS5 and IS20 FTIR spectrometers, which are day in, day out, also used for very similar applications like raw material verification, some of the in-process quality control tests, and sometimes even the final product verification tests as well. And they also comply in a very similar fashion, but with a different data set of softwares like Omnic Spectra, and they are also validated softwares, and we provide the full compliance in terms of the qualification, system suitability test, data integrity, and compliance. We have a research grade spectrometer IS50R, which can be combined to do multiple tasks, whether you are doing a mid-infrared monograph testing or raw material ID with a Raman or a polymorph testing with a Raman, and you also want to do conformity analysis with near infrared. This spectrometer can be combined to form all three techniques onto a one, and therefore you need a design qualification IQ, OQ, and PQ, which could be executed on all three techniques. And we have a validated software for this, which can do all of these tests. We provide traceable standards again, depending on which spectrometer you use. All the tests are carried out with respect to all the pharmacopoeias, and additional ASTM tests for peak positions, for example, for Raman spectroscopy, are carried out as well. Data integrity and compliance is done with security administration and audit manager, and both of these softwares are combined such that you get full compliance. And these are generalized softwares which can be used for most of our product portfolio. When it comes to near infrared analysis, we have two different types of analyzers, one which is used in the lab, Antares 2, and one which is used as a process analyzer, which is Antares MX analyzer. There are different sets of pharmacopoeia requirements in terms of how the testing is done, and there are different sets of softwares like TQ Analyst, Result, which are used to process the data, create the methods, but the data integrity and compliance is carried out using the same generalized software, security administration and audit manager, which we use for all our spectroscopy product portfolio. There are 5 main important aspects of choosing a vibrational spectroscopy analytical instrument. One is a validated software. The second one is full analytical instrument qualification. Does the instrument test according to the various pharmacopoeias, and does the software demonstrate data integrity and compliance along with the e-signatures capability and audit trails? If you're looking for answers to all these 5 whys, then we can say, yes, we do all of that, and therefore we provide a full solution in a pharmaceutical manufacturing or R&D. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Gail, John, and Shailesh, for your excellent presentations there. Thank you. So we will now move on to the Q&A session, where today's speakers will answer your questions. Don't forget that you can still submit questions using the panel found in the menu on the right side of your screens. So let's take a look at a first question. So we have one here. What proportion of an audit is assessing data integrity? Who from the panelists would like to have a go at answering that question and providing some more details?
Shall I take that one?
Please do, John. Thank you.
Okay. So when I'm conducting an audit, I really do consider data integrity, to be honest, throughout the audit. When I'm covering the quality management system part of it, I will ask how an organization has implemented data integrity guidance into their quality system. But I will be evaluating the data integrity measures as I go through the audit. So I will look at things, for instance, to see how different user access levels are administered and their rights within a computerized system. Okay, I will look at computerized systems to see if they've got appropriate audit trails in place, and that those audit trails preferably cannot be turned off. So they should always be switched on. So it's something that you've got at the back of your mind as you're evaluating in a particular, say, laboratory case, as you're going through the entire audit, because so many different things can affect data integrity. Not just the processes for analysing and reporting of the results, but also validation, for instance, of the equipment and the test methods being used. A lack of training is another area. I had a situation quite recently, actually, where lack of training had resulted in a significant data integrity issue, as well as making sure that the necessary controlled documents have been appropriately reviewed and approved as well. So there are a whole host of things that can impact on data integrity. So you always need to have that in your mind when you're looking at all the different aspects that you're going to cover during an audit.
Fantastic, John. Thank you so much. Okay, let's move on to another question. Somebody says here that they are working within the pharma industry as a QC microbiologist, and they ask, is transcribing of data from uncontrolled book sheets to RDS a good documentation practice? John, Gail, who would like to have a go answering that one?
Yeah, I'm happy to take it if you want. Okay. So essentially, I would say no, that's not good documentation practice. When I'm looking in a laboratory and I'm looking at the different media that are used to record data, I would expect to see controlled pro forma and or controlled laboratory notebooks are being used to record raw data that is then being used to report that. I'm assuming that RDS stands for report data sheet, is it? I'm not sure what you mean by that particular acronym. But when you come back to data integrity, for instance, and I want to look through a laboratory notebook, for instance, I want to see that all the pages are present. I want to be able to spot if somebody has torn a page out, for instance, because that's a way of detecting potentially that somebody has deleted data, that sort of thing. So usually laboratory notebooks that are page numbered and are controlled issued to the laboratory, I would expect to be used, not sort of scraps of paper to record raw data on.
Okay, good. Thanks for that, John. Okay, another question, and Gail, I think perhaps this is one that you can help us with. Somebody asks, is the audit trail review prior to the release of each batch a regulatory requirement, or is it only recommended so far? Is it necessary to perform an audit trail review after each measurement or analysis carried out at the equipment in the lab? Hopefully you can help us with this one.
Sure. I think you have to think about what type of audit trail it is you're looking at, and why are you looking at the audit trail. So it's important to also, from a data integrity point of view, to understand that the reason for looking at audit trails typically is to make sure that the data has not been changed, altered, or edited in a way that you would not expect it to have done. So you also want to be able to verify that the person who has done the work is the person you expect to have done the work. So the whole point of the audit trail is just to verify that everything is as you expect and that data has not been overly manipulated in any way or in a spurious way. So I would say you don't necessarily need to look at the data after each measurement, because that could be excessive time, but to have assurance of the data that's been reported, it should be done based on a risk assessment. So perhaps do a risk assessment as part of your validation phase to identify what would be an acceptable level of audit trail review, what types of audit trails you want to review, and when would be an appropriate time to review the audit trail. But I would expect you to have looked at, or someone to have looked at, the audit trails as part of their quality control processes prior to release of any data.
Great, thank you very much, Gail. Okay, another question here, perhaps, Shailesh, this is one that you can help us with. They ask, can you explain type B and type C instruments and equipments according to AIQ chapter in detail with a few examples? Shailesh, perhaps you can help us out with a bit more of an explanation, please.
Yeah. So Group B instruments are the instruments that provide a measurement or experimental condition which can reflect or affect a measurement. Typical examples are, for example, pH meter or an oven. And they may have a firmware, but you don't have a software to operate that. So the calibration and the routine maintenance performance checks suffice the need for AIQ. However, for Group C instruments, which are complex chromatography or mass spectrometers or vibrational spectrometers, on which you are making decisions, for example, release of raw materials or the final product quantification, if you have filed such an instrument for that, then you need to be aware of doing the full qualification, including software validation and also the ongoing maintenance of the method as well as the instrument itself.
Excellent, thank you very much. Okay, so I think we have time for just one more question. Looking here, somebody asks, is it acceptable to use an analytical instrument that is end of service in GMP, but also GLP and R&D? Who would be able to have a go at answering that one for us?
Certainly, I can give a shot for that one.
Yes, please, Gail, thank you.
I don't work in the GMP side necessarily, but I certainly do work in the GLP side, and certainly it's something that comes up quite frequently between GCP and GLP. The answer is yes. If you can use it for one GXP, the chances are it would be suitable to be used in other areas of GXP. So yes, a GMP compliant would be suitable to be used in a GLP environment, providing again you've assessed it that it is validated and fit for purpose for the type of analysis you wish to perform. When you're doing research and development R&D work, again, it can be suitable, but it depends on what level of controls you have put into the system. If you do not expect it to be validated system, then obviously it still needs to meet the requirements that the GXP requires. So you would still have to have that as a minimum, whereas some R&D systems, they don't necessarily want them or need them to go to that level of validated systems. Does that answer the question?
Perfect, thank you very much, Gail, that's great. Okay, well, unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today. Please join me in thanking Gail, John and Shailesh for their time today. Thank you all very much. Great presentations and some excellent answers there, so thank you all. So a message to the audience: as you exit, a survey will appear on your screen asking you to rate today's webinar. So please take a moment to provide your feedback, but if now is not a good time, the survey will be sent to you on email very soon, so please complete it when you can. On behalf of European Pharmaceutical Review and Thermo Fisher Scientific, I'd like to thank you all for attending, and we hope to see you at another webinar very soon. Thank you and goodbye.